That dawn had not started differently from the others. It was dawn. Around 3 in the morning, when almost everyone sleeps. And those who don't sleep are usually struggling inside. The room was dark. The only light came from the cell phone screen, forgotten on the bed. Notifications no longer mattered. Unread messages piled up on the screen. Some of the work. Others from friends asking if everything was okay. One from the mother, sent hours earlier. "Son, are you sleeping?" Nothing made sense that night. He had been awake for hours, turning from side to side, trying to escape from his own thoughts. The pillow had already been turned 3 times, looking for the cold side. The blanket, sometimes too heavy, sometimes insufficient for the cold that came from inside. But the more I tried to sleep, the more the silence screamed. It was not an ordinary silence. It was that kind of silence that amplifies everything. Every heartbeat seemed to echo in his chest. Each breath sounded too loud. And the thoughts seemed to have their own voice, all speaking at the same time. For years, he was known as someone strong, confident, self-assured, someone who solved everything himself. At work, he was the guy who didn't complain, who accepted challenges, that he stayed late when necessary. His colleague said, "You can leave it to him, he can handle it." In the family, it was the safe haven, the one everyone went to when they needed advice. The brother who lent money without asking when it would be returned. The son who didn't cry at funerals because he needed to be strong for others. Among his friends, he was the guy who made out, joked, improvised. The one who always had a funny story to tell. Who knew how to turn any tense moment into laughter. But all this, it was a mask. And that morning, all the masks had fallen. He spoke of God only when it was convenient. Sometimes in jest. Sometimes with irony. Sometimes with loose phrases like, "If God wanted, he would change it." He was not an atheist. He also did not consider himself religious. I was in that dangerous middle ground where many live. I believed in something, but I didn't let that something change anything. He had been raised in an evangelical family. He attended church during his childhood and adolescence. He knew some biblical passages by heart, especially those that his uncles quoted at Sunday lunches. She knew the old hymns, the ones that her grandmother sang while cooking. But at some point in adult life, faith became just tradition. He only appeared at weddings, baptisms, and funerals. It was something that was part of the past, not the present. When someone mentioned God in serious conversations, he didn't talk. Each one with their own faith, right? Or, "I respect it, but it's not really my thing." In difficult moments, he resorted to everything but God. I looked for solutions in motivational talks, in self-help books, in advice from people who were also lost. He tried to solve everything with his own strength, with his own intelligence. And when he couldn't, he blamed God. If there is a good God, why does he allow it? Where was God when I needed it? I think God has favorites, and I'm not one of them. Phrases like this came out of his mouth frequently, always loaded with barely concealed resentment. He didn't realize it, but he was at war with someone who said he didn't fully believe. Time went by. The years were accumulating. And along with them came the consequences. Relationships destroyed because of pride. I don't need anybody. Missed opportunities because of laziness masked as, "It wasn't for me." Small vices that grew slowly, silently, until they became invisible shackles. There were obvious vices, yes. The drink on weekends that started as fun and became a necessity. The cigarette that was only social and ended up becoming a constant companion. The pornography he consumed in the early hours, feeding a void that only grew. But there were also the more subtle vices. The addiction to always being right. The addiction to controlling everything and everyone. The addiction to external validation, checking likes and comments as if checking the pulse to find out if it is still alive. Life seemed organized on the outside. He had a job. He paid the bills. He didn't owe anyone a favor. He kept a routine. From the outside, No one would imagine that something was wrong. But inside it was in ruins. It was like those abandoned buildings that look whole from afar, but when you walk in, you realize there's nothing solid. The walls are cracked. The ground giving way. The pillars corroded. He had come home from work tired. He had a quick dinner, without paying attention to what he was eating. He watched some videos on his cell phone, those that add nothing but fill the void of time. He took a shower. He lay down. But sleep did not come. At first, she thought it was just accumulated fatigue. Everyone is stressed, it's normal. He picked up his cell phone again, scrolled through his social media feed. Photos of happy people, couples in love, friends traveling, achievements being celebrated, and that hurt. It wasn't envy. It was comparison. It was the feeling of falling behind while everyone else moved on. It was realizing that I was getting older, but not maturing. That time passed, but he remained in the same place. He put his cell phone away. He closed his eyes tightly. He tried to empty his mind. But that's when the memories started to arrive. Wrong decisions. That time he betrayed the trust of a friend out of self-interest. The day he lied to his family about where he was. The broken promises. The abandoned dreams. The people who hurt and never apologized. Words spoken without thinking. You'll never make it. I don't need you. Whatever. Phrases thrown to the wind that hit people in the face and left deep marks. Pride accumulated over the years. The refusal to admit mistakes. The habit of blaming others. The constant need to prove you right, even when you knew you were wrong. Wounds caused in other, and in himself. Each memory was like a weight being placed on one's chest. And the more I tried to push those thoughts away, the more they came back, stronger, sharper. That's when something different happened. Normally, he could control it. I could push everything under the mental rug and move on. But that night, the carpet could no longer fit underneath. Emotions began to boil over. Anger. Of himself. Of choices. Of lost time. Sadness. Deep. No name. No definite form. Fear. To continue like this. Of never changing. To die empty. And something else. Something he had avoided feeling for years. Loneliness. Not the loneliness of being physically alone, but that loneliness that exists even in the middle of the crowd. The feeling that no one really knew him. That all his connections were superficial. That if he disappeared tomorrow, he would be remembered, but not truly felt. He got out of bed abruptly. The heart racing. Irregular breathing. A feeling of tightness in the chest that did not go away. He got up from the bed. He walked slowly to the window. His bare feet felt the cold of the floor. Each step sounded loudly in the silence of the apartment. He opened the curtain a little, just enough to look outside. The street was completely quiet. No cars. No voice. No sign of movement. The lampposts illuminated the empty sidewalk. A dry leaf rolled past, blown by the wind. A cat crossed the street slowly, unhurriedly, as if he knew the world was his at that time. Normally, that scene would bring peace. But not that night. It was there that something happened. There was no thunder tearing through the sky. There was no mystical vision. There was no audible voice coming from the clouds. But there was awareness. A painful, clear, inevitable awareness. For the first time in a long time, he stopped running away. He stopped blaming others. He stopped creating justifications. He stopped lying to himself. And he did. He saw who he really was. Not the version he showed to the world. Not the character he represented on social networks. Not the exemplary son, the legal friend, the competent professional. Saw the real man. Insecure. Broken. Lost. Carrying pain that he never admitted to having. By pretending a strength he didn't have. He sat on the edge of the bed and stayed there. In silence. His hands trembled slightly. The throat tightened. The eyes starting to burn. There was no more energy to fight, to resist, to pretend. No memorized prayers. No pretty phrase. No overpromise. Just a thought that insisted on coming back, like a wave that always hits the same place. I'm not well. 3 words. Simple. But that he had never been able to really say. It has always been, I'm tired, but it will pass. Or, everyone goes through it. Or, I can handle it. But that morning, alone, without an audience, with nothing to prove, the truth came out. I'm not well. And soon after, another thought. If God exists, He knows. It was not a theological conclusion. It was not the result of a Bible study or sermon. It was something that sprang from a deep place, from that place where we keep the truths we don't want to face. If God exists, He sees. He knows the lies. He knows about sleepless nights. He knows about the hidden vices. He knows about the disguised loneliness. He knows everything that no one else knows. These 2 sentences, simple and naked, broke something inside. It wasn't a sudden break, like a vase falling to the ground. It was more like a dam that gives way after years of holding pressure. First a crack, then another, until everything falls apart at once. Pride began to give way. That pride that said, I don't need anybody. The one who insisted, I solve it myself. The one who said, I will not lower myself. All of this began to crumble. And in its place came something he didn't expect to feel. Relief. A strange relief. Painful. Like when you finally get a deep splinter out of your skin. It hurts, but at the same time it liberates. Self-sufficiency has lost strength. For years he believed that needing others was weakness. That asking for help was admitting failure. What a real man can fend for himself. But there, at that moment, he realized how much this was a lie, and how isolated this lie had left him. And silence, which used to hurt, began to teach. Because silence is not just the absence of sound. Sometimes, silence is presence. Presence of something greater. Something that doesn't need words to communicate. He realized that it was never the noise of the world that took him away from God, but the fear of facing oneself. It was easier to blame the busy routine, the lack of time, the distractions, tiredness. But the truth was deeper. He was afraid to stop. Fear of looking inside. Fear of discovering that it was empty. Fear of having to admit that he needed something other than himself. So I was always running. Jumping from appointment to appointment. From distraction to distraction. From relationship to relationship. Always busy. Always with a full agenda. Always no time for these things. But that morning, there was nowhere else to run. The noise had ceased. Distractions were turned off. There were no more commitments, friends, work, or entertainment to hide behind. It was just him and God, or the possibility of God, or the need for God. There, that morning, there was no visible miracle. The problems continued to exist. The debts did not disappear. The addiction did not evaporate. The past has not been erased. The consequences of the wrong choices were still there, waiting. But there was something deeper. Delivery. Not a surrender spoken out loud, with eloquent words and raised hands. A heartfelt surrender. It was like letting go of something you held so tightly that your fingers were already numb, and realized that what you thought you were controlling was actually controlling you. Tears came without warning. He didn't even notice when he started crying. It wasn't dramatic crying, the kind in a movie. It was that silent cry, which comes from a place so deep that it seems to have no end. They were not tears of despair. They were not tears of self-pity. They were tears of recognition. Recognize that I didn't control everything. That life was not in his hands. That no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't save himself. Recognize that you needed help. Not the superficial help of motivational advice or a catchphrase. But it really helps. Real transformation. real change. To recognize that playing with faith had cost him dearly inside. That using God's name lightly was not harmless. That the distance he felt was not because God had moved away, but because he himself had built walls. The tears continued to fall. They wet his face, his neck, his shirt. And he did. He didn't try to clean it. He didn't try to control himself. He didn't try to be strong. Because there, at that moment, being weak was the only honest thing he could do. Time passed. He can't say how much. Maybe half an hour. Maybe more. Gradually, the crying subsided. Her breathing calmed down. The tightness in his chest was loosening. And something began to change. Not in the problems. These continued. Not in the circumstances. These remained. But in it. It was as if a weight had been lifted. Not the weight of the problems, but the weight of pretending they didn't exist. The weight of carrying everything alone. The weight of having to look strong all the time. He looked out the window again. The sky was beginning to clear. That subtle flash that comes before the sun rises. It was not yet day, but it was no longer night either. At that moment in between, he realized something. The dawn had not come to destroy him. I had come to set him free. That crisis was not the end. It was the beginning. For the first time in a long time, he didn't know what would come next. And that's okay. I didn't have ready answers. I didn't have a 5-step plan. He had no promises that everything would be easy from then on. But there was something that I didn't have before. Clarity. Clarity that it needed to change. Clarity that it was no longer possible to live that way. Clarity that God was there, waiting, not with judgment, but with acceptance. When the sun began to rise, something had changed. He was still the same person, with the same story, with the same scars. The problems still existed. The consequences too. There were difficult conversations ahead. Apologies to be made. Addictions to face. Relationships to rebuild. Choices to correct. But he was no longer the same. Because that morning, he did not find religion. He found God. Not the God of ready-made phrases and easy answers. But the God who is present just when all seems lost. The God who does not turn away when you are weak, but draws near. The following days were not magical. He woke up the next morning tired. I still had to go to work. He still had bills to pay. He still had problems to solve. But something was different. It started small. A simple prayer in the morning, still lying down, "Thank you for one more day." He stopped lying so easily. When someone asked, "How are you?" sometimes he replied, "Not very well, but I'll get better." He began attending a church. Not the same as in childhood. A new one, where no one knew him. Where I could start over without carrying the weight of expectations. At first it was strange. He was used to judging from the outside. Now he was inside, vulnerable, searching. But it was there that he found community. People who also had difficult early mornings. Who were also fighting. That they also failed and started again. He sought professional help. He started therapy. He faced the vices head-on, with accompaniment. He went back to reading the Bible. No longer as someone who reads out of obligation, but as someone who seeks direction. The words that once seemed empty now had weight. He asked for forgiveness. For the family. To friends I had hurt. Some people accepted. Others don't. And he learned to live with it. The path was not linear. He had relapses. There were days when the desire to give up was strong. There were times when she doubted whether that morning had been real or just emotional. But whenever doubt came, he would return to that memory. The feeling of presence. The break. The delivery. And he knew that something real had happened. Today, when someone comes to him lost, he doesn't offer ready-made answers. He does not say, "Just pray and everything will be solved." It doesn't say, "God has a purpose, take it there." It does not say, "You need to have more faith." He listens. And when the moment comes, he tells about a late night. About a man who thought he had everything under control and found out he had nothing. About how his strength was not enough, but the grace was. About how silence, which seemed to be an enemy, was actually a teacher. And he always ends by saying, that early morning didn't solve everything, but he put everything in the right place. Since then, he has never been afraid of silence. Because he learned that sometimes it is in silence that God speaks loudest. He learned that crises are not always destruction. Sometimes they are reconstruction. He learned that touching the bottom is not the end. Sometimes it's the only way to find out that there is ground. And that some early mornings don't come to scare us, come to awaken us, to get us out of autopilot, to remind us that we are alive, to show us that there is still time. Because while there is dawn, there is the possibility of dawn. And it is always in the darkest moments that light becomes most necessary. Don't give up on your early morning. It may be just what you need to finally be born again. This is a story about breaking and restoring. About the journey of someone who had to lose control to find the way. May each person who passes through his own dawn find, as he did, the silent but real presence of the one who never abandons.